So, hey everybody, we are going to take a look at topic 4.13, the Society of the South and the Early Republic. This is looking both at a Southern white and a Southern black social structure as things come into play, as well as the development of the economic foundations of cotton. So let's take a look. In the South, the big story in the South is the development of King Cotton. Thanks to Eli Whitney and the cotton gin, there is just a huge growth of the cotton industry, so to speak. This is, a combination of the southern climate and soil, things that we talked about even going back to the colonial time period, plus the additions of the market revolution. Market revolution on this one, we're talking about the technology with the cotton gin, the technology in the northern mills, the technology with the steamboat transportation, taking the raw product up to the north to be manufactured in textile mills. This is really kind of a driving force between the southern economy and the overall national economy, as well as the push of like southern US cotton to go to Great Britain as well. There are, by today's standards, billions and billions of dollars being produced solely in the cotton industry, and this is going to lead to the development and the extension of a slave-based labor system in what in what Southerners did refer to as the peculiar institution. Just calling it the peculiar institution is almost like this real kind of offhand recognition that slavery is just maybe not morally okay. And when you're talking in terms of like an abolitionist Christian perspective, that there has to be some other kind of explanation as to why this is necessary. So this is a continuation of slavery from the old South, from the Carolinas and Georgia. And then you're adding into this the potential profits from the booming cotton industry. And this is going to kind of lead to the conclusion by many enslavers in the South that slavery as an institution is necessary to maintain growth and development of the country as a whole. So this also dovetails in with a romanticization of slavery as a traditional and as a superior way of life. That this is maybe the argument was being made that this was possibly the right direction taken to help the United States become that city upon a hill, and that it was not even a necessary evil. That's not a phrase that they would have used. They would have said it was a necessary component to what was going on, and they would try to find ways to, well, downplay the negatives associated with this. This viewpoint, this romanticized viewpoint, blatantly ignored the heavy workload and the heavy violence that was being conducted towards enslaved workers, in the sense that this is just seeking for new ways to justify what in other circumstances were considered to be completely unjustifiable. So when we take a look at the social structure in the South, for the most part, we are talking about the overall social structure. At the top of this is still kind of like an industrial revolution, market revolution kind of social structure where there is the wealthy elites at the top. But in the South, this is the elite landowners. These are people that are going to dominate in politics, that own thousands of acres of land, and they are going to enslave hundreds of people. These are, all said and told, probably less than 2,000 families across all southern states combined, and they are going to control the majority of the political power that's taking place in the South. So this is a small elite business owning class, but in business, we're talking about cotton plantations and enslavement. One step below them on this is what was best classified as small farmers. This makes up about 25% of the population, at least the white population in the South. These farmers are going to own a few hundred acres of land, and they are going to enslave 20 people or less. This is a small scale and a very cold comparison. This is kind of like a comparison between a small entrepreneurial business as a farm versus a large wealth-based business, big business, and large cotton plantations in the South. Farmers and planter aristocracy combined, we're still talking about it being not much more than 25% of the total population, but the majority of this falling into this second category of land owning farmers. The next step down on this are poor whites, sometimes referred to as poor white trash. It is important to keep track of this population because in this population they make up 75% of the southern white population, and they owned no enslaved people. They are not really owning more than a few dozen acres. In some cases, they don't own any land at all, but there is no economic viability for them towards enslavement. This does not mean they do not support slavery. What this means is that they support slavery as a way of symbolizing that they're not at the bottom rung of the social structure and that there is a chance for upward mobility in this system, and there is some chance for upward mobility as you go from being a poor white to being a land-owning farmer, but it is a true statement of fact that the majority of Southerners did not own any slaves at all. One step below the poor white population are free and enslaved African Americans. This is a completely separate topic in the College Board outline that is more of a 4.12 kind of thing, but it is worth that recognition here that it is kind of firmly placed at the bottom of this, and there is very little, if any, prospect of upward mobility from this spot. Last thing on here, and this isn't really a social class, more so as just a way of thinking. As you go into the 1820s and 1830s, into the 1840s, Southern whites adopt this concept of paternalism, the idea that you need an educated business class that was going to take on a fatherly role to maintain the social structure. So this means the planter aristocracy, and to a lesser extent land-owning farmers, that they're going to take not just a business dominant role, they're going to take a social stabilizing kind of role and kind of help out poor whites and free and enslaved African Americans, because there was a thought they would not be able to care for themselves, that there would be a devolution into chaos if there was not this kind of strict social structure that was placed into this situation. And this kind of paternalism is going to come directly at odds with some of the abolitionist rhetoric that is growing across the North, but in pockets of the South as well, going into the 1830s and 1840s. So this is an issue that is going to get more and more contentious as you move forward through time. But without doubt, the biggest factor in the expansion of slavery in the United States has to do with the expansion of the cotton industry. As you take things from the southeast in the original 13 colonies further west towards the Mississippi River. This area that it's going to expand to is sometimes referred to as the Cotton Belt. And so if I click here, kind of keep an eye on the map. I can't really go back on this, so I only get one opportunity to kind of transition, but you can back up on the playback if you want to. So you can kind of see, this is percentage of slaves really focused in the Carolinas, really focused in Virginia, really focused on the Louisiana, Mississippi River Delta going through here, and you can kind of see cotton production in some of those same areas. But as you jump ahead from 1820 up to 1860 on this map, you can really see in both cases the growth of cotton production and the growth of slavery as you're looking in these areas. This is the Cotton Belt where they're growing that petite Gulf cotton, and this is going to create the real tension that comes in with this when it comes down to the conflict over slavery north and south. It's not about the existence of slavery in states where it already existed, like in the Carolinas or in Virginia, but more so the conflict over the expansion of slavery. a little bit towards Mississippi and Alabama, but even more so when you get to places like, well, Missouri and the Missouri Compromise and the development of the internal slave trade, or the Second Middle Passage, that you can refer to it that way. This is something that is, the Missouri Compromise is in the 1820s, but this concern over the expansion of slavery is only going to get more and more pronounced as things start to move forward towards more expansion for the country. And so that means, to me, that means that the 1830s as a decade serve a little bit as a turning point. Prior to the 1830s, the only time slavery showed up as a national political issue was, I mean, the Constitutional Convention in 1787, but then again from the Missouri Compromise in 1821. But then in the early 1830s, there's a series of events that take place that kind of make slavery an ongoing debated issue. Step one is in 1831, there is the Nat Turner Revolt in Virginia. The same, a couple of months later, you have William Lloyd Garrison's publication of The Liberator. That is the abolitionist newspaper centered in the North, but is trying to take a postal, trying to use the U.S. Postal Service to send that newspaper kind of on a nationwide scale, trying to get more people to be able to have access and read those abolitionist ideas. By 1832, there's the nullification crisis, which I know nullification doesn't have anything specifically to do with the slave issue, but South Carolina was trying to nullify the Northern Tariff. And if South Carolina is nullifying something that is going to be seen as a push from Northern states to impose their will, you can combine the nullification crisis with the Liberator, and you can kind of see maybe there is a little bit of entrenching so far as Southern states trying to maintain their Southern traditions, whether that is to abandon the tariff or whether that is to maintain the institution of slavery. By 1833, Andrew Jackson steps in, and he is going to ban the distribution of abolitionist literature through the U.S. Post Office. So that means the Liberator and Garrison's abolitionist rhetoric is no longer going to be circulated by the Postal Service into any of the southern states. This is made kind of at the request of folks like John Calhoun, who's kind of a central figure in the nullification crisis, that this is maybe another political bargain designed to, well, kind of keep sectional tensions at bay. And then to follow up on that even further, there's a gag resolution in Congress where from between the years 1836 to 1844, Congress will not even debate any anti-slavery petitions as they come up. And so there is another effort from Congress to ignore the slave issue as you're going through this period of democracy for the common man. I really do think that Andrew Jackson and Jacksonian democracy for the common man is another background issue here, because once you give people a little bit of a say in politics, you can't really control what issues are going to come up. And so I think in the 1820s and 30s there wasn't real recognition that slavery was going to become an issue, but it's going to become an issue so much so that Congress agrees to just ignore it and ban it until you get to the 1840s. And that's going to take us into time period 5 so far as pushing us closer to the Civil War. The other thing that you start to see during this time period is an argument being made from Southern whites that slavery is a positive good, that slavery is good for slave owners, slavery is good for the economy, slavery is good for the enslaved workers themselves, that there would be a sense of chaos if this structure wasn't put in place. And if you go and you look at historical records, there is no example, broad scale example of this argument being made at any point before the 1830s. So there is a dividing line that comes into play here that's going to be important to keep track of, because when we come back to this topic going into Unit 5, going into the 1840s and 1850s, this is really the context that is going to drive that debate all the way through.